Final question this evening, and then what we're going to do after this is I'm going to ask each candidate to say in 7 words why you should vote for them or their party. Before we do that, so it gives you a chance to think about that, before that, the final question: should the European Union be taking more of a lead in curbing carbon emissions if we are to stand any chance of avoiding climate breakdown? So, Molly.
I knew you were going to do that.
So did I.
Oh dear, I have so much to say about this one, it's quite tough. Look, the most important thing the European Union can do to tackle climate change is introduce a carbon tax, because at the moment it's often cheaper to do something that's bad for the climate than to do something that's the right thing to do for the climate. A very good example is flying. Now, if we introduce a carbon tax, then everything that produced carbon dioxide emissions would become more expensive automatically. And we could actually set that carbon tax on a trajectory like that, so every year it would become more expensive, and this would be a massive lever on the whole European economy to make us move towards a much more carbon neutral future. The reason we don't have that, the European Commission actually proposed that in 1992. If we'd followed through in 1992, we wouldn't be in a climate emergency. The reason it didn't follow through on that was that some governments blocked it, sadly, including our own. So what we have instead is the emissions trading system, which is greatly inferior. But I think we also need to make sure that we invest well in the sort of systems that we need to enable much lower carbon activities. So we need much more investment in renewable energy. The only reason we're still sticking to any renewable energy targets at all in this country is because we're in the EU. The Tories have cut back on all of that investment, and that will be seriously at risk if we go ahead with Brexit. We also need to change the way our transport system works, so we have much better train systems right across Europe. I'm sure Andrew will agree with me about this, because we both love night trains. And then, again, you can travel for 1/10 the amount of carbon emissions that you currently do. It's interesting, I've worked a lot on the sustainable finance agenda, which is about shifting large-scale investment away from dirty industries and to clean ones. And the finance sector is really up for this, and they've been very supportive.
Okay. Andrew, go again.
Can I say, I agree with virtually everything that Molly said. I was the Transport Minister that gave a really big boost to the electrification of the railways. We have less of our intercity network electrified than any other major European country, and we should put that right. We should have a big move towards electric vehicles. The National Infrastructure Commission, which I used to chair, said 2 days ago that we should have near universal electric vehicles by 2030, and I agree with that. We should give people time to transition, and we should give incentives, but that should happen. And then we need to have a much, much greener way of generating our electricity, and I strongly agree with what Molly said about a big, big move towards renewables. For example, offshore wind power, which was much derided 20 years ago, is now one of the cheapest and most effective and efficient forms of electricity generation. We need much more attention to practical policies of this kind, in tandem with Europe-wide targets, and of course it was the last Labour government that introduced the first binding carbon reduction targets, and we need to see those much tougher, and we need to work across parties, across countries, within the European Union to bring all this about. It's an argument for leading, not leaving.
The question was, would the EU make it easier to combat climate change and to look after the planet? My answer to that is no, because the care of the planet is the duty of every single country on this planet, and it has been the international agreements such as Kyoto which have actually made the difference. So I don't believe that the EU has some unique role to play. But let me say this, leaving the EU does not mean that we will not afterwards cooperate with the EU where we perceive an interest that we should have in common. We have never said that. We want good relations with the EU after Brexit. We want cooperation with the EU after Brexit, but we do not want to be run by the EU ever again.
I'm sorry, but that says it all.
Climate change is not about cooperation and self-interest. It's about leadership, and it's about leadership now. And that's what we need from this country, and that's what we need from the EU. It's an issue that should be beyond politics, because this is such an emergency. And so I completely agree with Molly, and I agree with Andrew, and this is something we need to be working together in this country and in the EU. It's not about cooperation for self-interest. It's about leadership, and we need it right now.
Can you read out the question again? Because I think we've got a bit muddled.
Should the EU be taking more of a lead in curbing carbon emissions if we are to stand any chance of avoiding climate breakdown?
Yes, absolutely, the EU should be taking more of a lead. And the reason I say that is because I don't believe national governments, particularly the government we have here at the moment, are interested in setting the targets that we need and taking it seriously. For example, the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, I don't know if you're aware of that, was a massive project in Swansea to get power, wave power going, and it was a new innovative project. It was going to be quite expensive, but the reason we need to invest in these sorts of projects and this sort of technology is because it's an early technology, and we need to invest in it so we can learn and it can grow and it becomes cheaper and it becomes more efficient, and as the years go by we get better and better and better at it, like we have with wind power, and we must be doing that now. We can't afford to just put it on the back burner and say it's too expensive. And also, since the 2016 referendum, you may be aware that Donald Trump was elected in the United States 6 months later, and Donald Trump does not believe in climate change. Now, one of the reasons the EU has to be strong on this is because they have to influence countries like America and China, and only in a bloc of 500 million people like the EU will we have the strength to put pressure on countries like America to actually do their part as well, because it's their planet too.
Absolutely, the EU should lead on climate change for the EU, and the UK government should lead on climate change for the UK. The US government probably won't lead on climate change for the US, but what is really positive is actually the US governors and many states are signing up to commit to the Paris climate change. They recognise the fact that their leader may not be involved in it. That's what America are doing. But in the UK, climate change and all of our environmental issues are about culture. Now, people keep saying to me, in Germany, you can take a plastic bottle back into a shop and put it in and get your money back. They're part of the EU, we're part of the EU, so why aren't we doing that? It doesn't work that simply. And the point is, as Anne said, we should continue to work with our EU colleagues on these things. We should lobby in all international arenas that we can, and we should blaze a trail for how that can work. If we can't get things through in the EU and we have to compromise constantly, think what we can achieve as a country to set that trail blazing and actually make climate change a reality, not make climate change a reality, and actually get things moving for our country, for our culture, in a way that works for everybody in this country, and show the rest of the world how it's done.
I think our climate policy is really affected by our energy policy. And the problem is the EU have got a messed up energy policy. An example of this will be, I think about 2-3 months ago, the European Court of Justice said that our government paying to keep stations on standby to handle the intermittent load of renewables was illegal state aid, and we have to stop doing it. So how are we going to keep power going if we can't have power stations on standby to kick in when we need it? And it's these kind of things where the EU are contradictory all the time that we need to sort it out. And, you know, it's climate, it's worldwide. Therefore, if we just shut down all our power stations and they open up in China and India, it's still global. We need to think about it sensibly and not just hand it over, you know, to the EU. Thank you.